This is the Music History In-Depth podcast for July 3rd through the 9th. On this week's show, John meets Paul, two musicians die under controversial circumstances, and we say happy birthday to one of the most eclectic performers around. This first story is about chance encounters and being prepared. Now, I'm not a man who believes in fate or luck. To me, luck is recognizing being prepared for and then taking advantage of the opportunities that come your way. Same thing with fate. I think that the actions that you take set you up for what people believe is fate. What does this have to do with music? Well, as you'll see, pretty much everything. On July 6, 1957, there was a small annual church picnic in Liverpool, England. At the time, John Lennon had a band called the Quarrymen. The only reason why this group was playing at the festival was because of a family connection to the people who decided to add a band to their picnic. Fate, you say? Nope. Connections, or nepotism, whatever you want to call it. Now, also at this picnic was a young lad by the name of Paul McCartney. Paul was there to check out the scene. Paul watched the Quarrymen play, and while he liked the band, he really liked John. John wasn't the best guitarist, but he did know how to hold an audience with charm. Paul was immediately struck by John's talent, and after the show, a mutual friend introduced Paul to John. Fate, you say? Nope. Connections again. Anyway, while Paul was hanging out with the band, no one paid attention to him. That is, until Paul brought out his guitar that he carried around with him most of the time and began playing. John now was the guy who was struck by someone else's talent, Paul's. Even though Paul was 2 years younger, Paul was a much better guitar player. Paul even taught John how to write down music onto sheet music paper and how to properly tune a guitar. John asked Paul to join the Quarrymen 2 weeks later, and the rest, as they say, is history. Now, there's a lot in that story. For starters, what if Paul wasn't carrying his guitar that day? Well, as any creative will tell you, if you can carry your tool of choice, be it a camera or a guitar, you carry it everywhere with you. Hell, you're practically married to it. Paul was that type of creative. What if Paul had not practiced his guitar pretty much nonstop? Then he would not have impressed John that day. Luck is preparation meeting opportunity. It wasn't luck that brought the two of them together. It was connections to the both of them that made the meeting possible, and it was Paul's preparation that turned the encounter into the birth of the Beatles and one of the greatest musical partnerships of all time. And it all started at a picnic in Liverpool, England on July 6th, 1957. Barry Eugene Carter was born in 1944 in Texas. During his teens, he and his brother were in a gang. His brother was killed by another gang, and Barry ended up doing a little time in jail for stealing tires. It was while he was in jail that he first heard Elvis Presley's It's Now or Never. Barry said that it changed his life. Once out of jail, Barry decided to become a singer. He started doing backup vocals, then started recording his own songs. He ended up working as an A&R guy for Delphi Records, developing, writing, and producing songs for other artists. By this time, he was known by what we all know him as today, Barry White. In the early 1970s, Barry was working with a Supreme-style group called Love Unlimited. In 1972, they had a hit called Walking in the Rain with the One I Love. He then ended up switching record labels and went to 20th Century Records, and it was there where his solo recording career flourished. Starting in 1973, he started racking up hits on the R&B charts like Never Gonna Give You Up, Can't Get Enough of Your Love, It's Ecstasy When You're Next to Me, and You're the First, the Last, My Everything. Barry's deep voice, smooth vocals, and orchestral arrangements made him one of the preeminent R&B singers and producers of the 1970s, right up until his death on Independence Day, July 4th, 2003, at the age of 58. The man's voice and smooth vocal style are probably responsible for about 1/10 of the world's population, considering how many people were conceived to his music. Seriously. Worldwide, he had 20 gold and 10 platinum singles, plus 106 gold albums, with 41 of those going platinum. And yet, shockingly, Barry is not in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame yet. I always thought that he was in, so it kind of shocked me when he ended up on a list of biggest Hall of Fame snubs. Go figure. The legendary Mr. Barry White, sure you're right, passed away on Independence Day, July 4, 2003, from a variety of health issues at the age of 58. Louis Armstrong's story begins in New Orleans, Louisiana. Exposed to ragtime, blues, and brass band music from a young age, he developed a natural musicality. A defining moment came when he was sent to the Colored Waifs Home for Boys, where he learned to play the cornet, igniting his lifelong passion that everybody now knows him for. Armstrong's early professional life saw him honing his skills on Mississippi riverboats and playing alongside legendary musicians like Joe King Oliver. His innovative approach to the cornet, characterized by improvisation, a powerful sound, and a focus on melody, set him apart from all the other cornet players. In the 1920s, Louis moved to Chicago, Illinois, and joined Fletcher Henderson's orchestra. And there, his groundbreaking techniques flourished, particularly his use of scat singing, which is improvisational vocalizations that mimicked instrumental sounds. This innovative technique became a defining element of jazz singing, especially with Ella Fitzgerald, the legendary singer herself. Armstrong's most influential recordings came with his own bands, the Hot Five and the Hot Seven. These groups pushed the boundaries of jazz, with Armstrong's improvisational solos and expressive vocals taking center stage. Tracks like West End Blues, which we spoke about on last week's podcast and is considered by most to be the greatest jazz recording ever recorded, and his song Heebie Jeebies showcased his revolutionary approach, forever changing the way that jazz was played and listened to. By the 1930s, Armstrong's fame had transcended jazz. He appeared in films, toured internationally, and became a cultural icon. His charismatic personality, infectious smile, and trademark gravelly voice, "That's me, yeah. That's actually how he used to talk, captivated audiences worldwide. He became known as Satchmo and later Ambassador Satch, a testament to his role in promoting American music across the globe. However, Armstrong's career was not without its issues. As a black musician in segregated America, he faced a lot of racial barriers and also criticism for his upbeat persona. Despite these challenges, he continued to break through the barriers and inspire generations of musicians across all racial lines. Arguably, Armstrong's most celebrated collaboration was with the First Lady of Song, the aforementioned Miss Ella Fitzgerald. Their paths crossed in the mid-1940s, and their instant musical connection led to a series of recordings that remain classics to this day. The albums Ella and Lewis, Ella and Lewis Again, and Porgy and Bess showcased their playful banter and unmatched vocal skills. Armstrong's gravelly charm perfectly complemented Fitzgerald's scatting and soaring vocals, creating a joyful and dynamic sound. These recordings not only brought jazz to a wider audience, but also solidified Armstrong's reputation as a master collaborator. And while his pairing with Ella is iconic, Armstrong's collaborative spirit extended far beyond vocalists. He worked with a diverse range of musicians, each bringing out a different facet of his talent. Early in his career, he performed with big bands led by Fletcher Henderson and Louis Russell, honing his improvisational skills and developing his signature trumpet sound. He also collaborated with pianists Earl Father Hines, and also Oscar Peterson, creating a lot of virtuistic duets. Louis's collaborative spirit was not confined by genre. For instance, he famously recorded with Bing Crosby, a collaboration that initially raised eyebrows due to their racial and stylistic differences, and yet their recordings, such as Pennies from Heaven and Here Comes the Groom, showcased their mutual respect and ability to find common ground. He even experimented with yodeling with Leon Thomas, demonstrating his openness to new musical experiences. He inspired countless musicians, from jazz vocalists like Billie Holiday to singers like Frank Sinatra. Armstrong's influence wasn't confined to just jazz. His vocal style and stage presence paved the way for generations of singers, including Elvis Presley and Ray Charles. Songs like What a Wonderful World and Hello Dolly transcended the genre, becoming timeless classics that were loved by people around the world. His trumpet playing, with its virtuosity and expressiveness, inspired countless musicians, shaping the evolution of popular music. When Louis Armstrong passed away on July 6, 1971, from heart issues, his impact on music and American pop culture made him one of the most important cultural figures of the 20th century. He redefined jazz, popularized scat singing, and brought joy to the millions through his music and especially his personality. Today, Louis remains a beloved figure, his infectious spirit and music continuing to inspire generations. The man they called Satchmo, one of the most important entertainers of jazz and 20th century music, Mr. Louis Armstrong, passed away on July 6, 1971, from heart issues at the age of 69. Before we continue, we'd like to tell you about the Music History Today podcast, where we go over the events that happened on that particular day in music history. The Music History Today podcast drops every single day, including weekends, on this podcast network. Now, back to the Music History In-Depth podcast. The original nicknames to this group were DJ Run, Don of Curtis Blow, Easy D, and Jazzy Jace. In the very early 1980s, there were 3 kids who grew up in Hollis, Queens. Joseph Simmons had an older brother named Russell, who was a hip-hop promoter and had started a record label with his college roommate Rick Rubin called Def Jam Records. Russell at the time promoted rapper Curtis Blow and needed someone to be Curtis's DJ. Joseph was recruited to be that DJ, and soon Joseph wanted to rap. Russell let Joseph record one song, which went absolutely nowhere. In the meantime, Joseph had a friend called Daryl McDaniel. The two of them wanted to rap as a duo. At first, Russell said no because he didn't like Daryl's rap style, but eventually he said yes. They needed a DJ, though, so they got their friend Jason Mizell. Russell then changed their nicknames. Joseph DJ Run, son of Curtis Blow, became Run. Daryl Easy D became DMC, and Jason Jazzy Jace became Jam Master J. And the group became known as Run DMC. For the record, they hated the name of the group, but it kind of grew on them. They signed to Profile Records and released their first single, It's Like That. The song hit number 15 on the Billboard R&B charts. After that success, they released their first album, Run DMC, in 1984. That album had hits like Hard Times, and it also had the transcending song Rock Box, with a mixture of hip-hop and hard rock, complete with the blistering guitar of session musician Eddie Paul Martinez. The song was one of the first to combine what were, at least at that point, 2 completely separate worlds, black inner-city hip-hop and white heavy metal. Both were considered dangerous in the eyes of the mainstream, which made them a perfect combination for the kids. 1985 was a big year for the group from a career perspective. First, they released their next album, King of Rock, which further solidified their sound with the songs King of Rock and Can You Rock It Like This. They were then the only hip-hop act to perform at Live Aid. They followed that up with an appearance in the hit movie Crush Groove. 1986 saw their biggest success with one of the most important albums of the 1980s, Raising Hell. The album was produced by Rick Rubin, who had a major role in one of the most important songs of all time. The album was almost done when they decided to do one more song to pique the interest from their fans who liked the hard rock sounds of King of Rock and Rockbox. After some discussion, they fell upon the idea of doing the song Walk This Way by Aerosmith, with Howie Weinberg as the mastering engineer on the track. Originally, they were going to sample the song, but Rick and Jam Master Jay wanted to redo the song completely. They put out the call to Aerosmith to gauge interest. At first, there wasn't any. What has to be remembered at this time is that in 1985, no one liked Aerosmith. Known as the Toxic Twins at that point, Aerosmith's Steven Tyler and Joe Perry were looked at as part of a group whose heyday was in the 1970s and had a lot of internal band issues along with some substance issues that you probably can figure out. They were, at that point, done as a band. Even with their careers in freefall, Joe and Steven did not want to do the song because, honestly, they hated hip-hop. To them, and a lot of other artists, mind you, hip-hop was taking their songs, using them without paying the artists, and making money off of them. Kind of like AI these days. The Toxic Twins wanted no part of it, and you really can't blame them. Rick, however, convinced them to at least come to the studio to work things out. And from there, once they saw how Jam Master Jay could cut the record precisely where he wanted the beat to be at will on the turntables, they were fascinated, and then they wanted in on the collaboration. The music video itself also became iconic. The video unfolds with both acts on opposite sides of a wall, and then once Run DMC starts rapping loud to the beat, Steven breaks through the wall with a mic stand. And then, of course, everybody ends up on a concert stage together as a show of solidarity, singing Kumbaya and breaking down the barriers between both the rock and hip-hop cultures. And I'm sure in this day and age, that would probably piss off more than a few people in a certain administration. Anywho, rumor has it that Steven couldn't break down the wall at first, but they left that part into the final cut. The song, the album, and the music video all became big hits, along with becoming icons of 80s music. It also gave Aerosmith their career back, as the band then got back together and started putting out hit songs like Love in an Elevator, Dude Looks Like a Lady, Angel, Jaded, Don't Want to Miss a Thing, among many, 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 many others, in one of the greatest musical comebacks in rock music history. After the success of Raising Hell, Run DMC put out Tougher Than Leather and Down with the King, but by then the sound that the group had pioneered had already changed, and so did they. Run became a minister while Jay became a producer, producing the group Onyx, who had the hit song Slam. The three guys started to not get along, and they started to go in different directions musically. In 2002, Jam Master Jay was shot and killed in his studio in Queens, New York. His murder was finally solved after 20 years, basically. As for this version of the song Walk This Way, it was released on July 4th, 1986 in America and went top 10 in 13 different countries. It never hit number 1 in America, only going to number 4 on the Billboard Hot 100 singles chart. It hit number 8 on the Billboard R&B Hip Hop chart, which was delightfully called the Hot Black chart back then because corporations were pretty insulting back then, that's why. It was the 89th biggest song of 1986 and sold over 1 million copies in America. It also won a ton of awards, including Best Rap Single at the Soul Train Music Awards, and has ended up on many different best of lists regardless of genre. The music video has also been cited as one of the greatest music videos of all time on more than a few best of lists. I don't know if the music video itself was actually one of the best. That might be a stretch, but it and the song were definitely important. You have to remember the times. In the 1980s, especially the early to mid-1980s, black kids had their music, white kids had their music, and never the twain shall meet, except, of course, for geeky music kids like me who grew up on almost everything and loved almost everything. Rap music at the time was looked at as dangerous and pissed off everyone in the mainstream. What Run DMC did was to combine rock and rap music so that common ground was met between the races, at least for the Gen X kids. It was an extremely important rung on the ladder to global acceptance of hip-hop, as the Beastie Boys made rap music popular with the suburban kids, and for better or worse, MC Hammer and Vanilla Ice watered down rap music enough to make suburban parents accept it. Well, okay, at least some of it. Run DMC, Tupac, Ice-T, Public Enemy, and Body Count still scared the hell out of them. Run DMC's iconic version of Aerosmith's hit song Walk This Way, released on July 4th, Independence Day, 1986. The alternative rock group REM started out in the college town of Athens, Georgia, which was home to another groundbreaking group, the B-52s. College student Peter Buck was working at Wuxtree Records in 1980 when fellow student Michael Stipe walked in. The two of them struck up a conversation and realized that they liked the same music. The two soon-to-be friends then met students Mike Mills and Bill Berry. After realizing that they shared a love of music, the four guys decided to form a band together and play around town. Eventually, they started to get serious about music, so they ditched college. The name REM was picked out of a dictionary by Michael Stipe and is short for Rapid Eye Movement, which is that dreamlike state when you sleep. The group got a local manager and went to work making a name for themselves by touring in the southern United States. The problem that they had was that since they were one of the pioneers of alternative rock, they had to build the genre's infrastructure, as clubs weren't really open to having alternative rock groups then. So, while they kept things lean by doing things like having $2 a day per food allowance, they built up their fan base the old-fashioned way. They started with word of mouth, then passing around bootleg tapes of their performances along with playing for college rock radio stations. On July 8, 1981, REM put out their first single, Radio Free Europe, off of their EP, Chronic Town. Mike Easter from the local band Let's Active was the producer on it, with all of the members of the group writing the song, and was recorded at Drive-In Studio in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. Mike Mills came up with an idea for the song while fooling around on his guitar in a record store. Peter Buck then took the song and worked with it. Bill Berry added his part to it, and Michael Stipe did the final lyrics. That, according to a recent interview they did for CBS News, was how they wrote most of their songs. Radio Free Europe was recorded on April 15, 1981, and set the template for how college indie bands did business back in the early 1980s, setting the stage for the American alternative rock movement of the 1980s and 90s. This whole thing got the attention of independent record label IRS Records, who signed them to a contract in 1982 and got them right to work, recording at Reflection Studios in Charlotte, North Carolina. After clashing with their first producer, Stephen Hague, the group was able to work with Don Dixon and Mitch Easter, who had worked on Chronic Town with them. Recording sessions started in January 1983, took less than 8 weeks to finish, and was mixed and mastered in March of 1983 due to the fact that a lot of the songs were already written. In keeping with their ad hoc way of doing things, they experimented with different microphone positions, using guitar reverb, and putting drums in a different room for recording. The result of that was the critically acclaimed debut album Murmur, released the very next month in April 1983. Their follow-up album Reckoning was done almost the same exact way and with the same two producers. Reckoning was recorded in December 1983 in Charlotte, North Carolina again, and took only 16 days to record. The first 8 days of the month, then a 2-week break to play a gig, and then another 8 days to finish the album. Reckoning, which was released in April 1984, was a lot darker in mood than Murmur, with themes of alienation and loss weaving their way across the album. Nonetheless, Reckoning was also a big success, both with the critics and the public. Their third album, Fables of the Reconstruction, is considered by many critics to be one of the group's masterpieces, but it didn't come so easy this time. Joe Boyd came in as producer, and Joe was known for being a perfectionist on his albums, which clashed with REM's style of recording. Still, Fables was recorded relatively quickly, with the session starting at Air Studios in London, England in March of 1985, with the album being released in June 1985. Again, it was a critical and commercial success, both in America and in the UK, where it became their first charting UK album, peaking at number 11. Their fourth album, Life's Rich Pageant, was different in many ways from their earlier albums. For starters, it marked a shift from their post-punk emo alternative rock and more towards a hard rock style of alternative, you might say. Second, it was the first album where you could actually hear Michael Stipe was singing, as his vocals previously were almost buried on his songs and he was usually mumbling. And actually, if you listen to the first few albums, you can tell he's kind of mumbling on them. New producer Don Gaiman got Michael to sing more clearly this time around. Life was recorded at John Mellencamp's Belmont Mall Studios in Indiana. They started recording in April 1986, finished it in May, released it in July. This was the first album that got them more of a foothold into mainstream top 40 radio, although they wouldn't get their first top 10 song until their next album. That next album, Document, was recorded in March and April 1987 at Sound Emporium Studios in Nashville, Tennessee, with new producer Scott Litt. The album was released in August 1987 and became a top 10 album with REM classics The One I Love, It's the End of the World as We Know It, and I Feel Fine, and Finest Work Song. It was also their last independent release with IRS Records, as REM then signed with major record label Warner Brothers. IRS did put out the group's successful greatest hits album called Eponymous. Side note, It's the End of the World as We Know It was very cleverly put into the 1996 blockbuster movie Independence Day as the song that was playing when the scientists discovered the radio signal that announced the aliens' presence. Just a little trivia for you. The first album that was released on Warner Brothers was Green. It was recorded at Ardent Studios in late May to early July 1988 with Scott Lind back at the helm, then was mixed and mastered at Bearsville Sound Studios in Bearsville, New York until early September. The bet that Warner Brothers made on REM paid off when Green was released in November 1988 and hit number 12 on the albums charts. Bearsville Sound Studios was the primary location for the recording of the album that would turn REM into superstars Out of Time. This album, which was also partially recorded at John Keane's studio in Athens, Georgia, took longer to produce than most of their other albums, as they spent most of 1990 working up the songs and then recording them with Scott Litt starting in September of that year. They spent a lot of time experimenting with different genres, from the funk rap of Radio Song with guest artist KRS-One to having Kate Pearson on guest vocals for Shiny Happy People, to doing psychedelic rock for the song Belong. To add a little extra to the sauce, they then mixed the album at Prince's studio, Paisley Park Studios in Minneapolis, Minnesota. On March 12th, 1991, Out of Time was released. Led by the chart-topping smash hit Losing My Religion, the album became one of the biggest-selling albums of the 1990s and cemented REM as the kings of alternative rock, a genre that would rule the musical landscape for the decade. The album won 3 Grammy Awards, including Best Alternative Album, while the music video for Losing My Religion, which was filmed like artistic paintings, won the group numerous MTV Video Music Awards. While they were finishing up work on Out of Time, REM started work on their next album, Automatic for the People. They started writing songs in December 1990 and started recording demos at Paisley Park Studios in June 1991, with formal recordings starting on September 1991 at Ocean Way Recording Studios in Los Angeles. Scott Lynn again guided them through this album, with string arrangements to some of the songs being handled by bassist John Paul Jones of Led Zeppelin fame. Who knew John Paul Jones had that talent in his arsenal? Amazing guy. When released, Automatic for the People became another huge smash, going to number 1 on the album's charts worldwide and spawning the hit songs Drive, Man on the Moon, and Everybody Hurts. Another side note, Man on the Moon was a tribute to the late comedian and actor Andy Kaufman. The song became the title for the 1999 movie about Andy that starred Jim Carrey and was also a part of the movie soundtrack. The next album, Monster, took a different route to success than the other albums. After tasting mainstream and major label success with more melodic songs, the group wanted something more aggressive and raw this go-around. They wanted to take their artistic frustration and anger at the music industry through their songs, and to also deal with the death of their close friend, actor River Phoenix, who had passed away on Halloween night 1993, along with the death of another friend, Kurt Cobain of Nirvana, on April 5th, 1994. Monster was recorded at Kingsway Studios in New Orleans starting in February 1994 before moving to Crossover Soundstage in Atlanta, Georgia in March that year, before finally finishing in June. It was released on September 27, 1994. Behind the hits What's the Frequency Kenneth and Crush Eyeliner, Monster became another huge hit and won the band 4 Grammy Awards. In 1995, while on the road to support Monster, REM took 8-track recorders with them and recorded their next album, New Adventures in Hi-Fi, as they wanted to capture the energy that they felt while on the road. They finished the album at Bad Animals Studios in Seattle, Washington, and had vocal help from the legendary Patti Smith on the song Ebo the Letter. This time around, the mixing duties would be handled not only by stalwart producer Scott Lynn at Sunset Sound in Los Angeles, but also by Pat McCarthy at Louis Clubhouse in Los Angeles and John Keane at John Keane's studio in Athens, Georgia, and also at a studio in Portland, Maine. New Adventures would be released in September 1996 and become another huge hit, although it didn't sell as many copies as their other 90s albums. It also marked a few milestones in the band's personal lives. First, they re-signed their contract with Warner Brothers Records. Then, the group decided to let their longtime manager, Jefferson Holt, go due to alleged sexual harassment charges against him by one of the band's employees. Then, drummer Bill Berry decided to quit the band due to a lot of health problems, including having a brain aneurysm while on stage in 1995 during a concert. After a couple of decades of laying low and becoming a farmer of all things, Bill joined a new group called the Bad Seeds back in 2022. He still did reunions with REM every now and then at least. To say that Bill's departure led to the band's downslide would be pretty harsh, especially since it probably had more to do with the changing winds of the ever-fickle music industry than Bill's departure did. Still, Bill was a major part of the band's creative process, and without him, the band kind of missed something. They continued on, though, releasing 1998's Up, 2001's Reveal, 2004's Around the Sun, 2008's Accelerate, and 2011's Collapse into Now. However, none of them hit platinum status, with the last three not even hitting gold status in America. The remaining members of the band amicably called it quits in 2011 after deciding that the band, after 31 years, had run its course. They've put out special projects and done interviews to push books, anniversary editions of their albums, and such. However, there's been no official reunion album or concert tour, and I suspect that there will never be. It is just not their style. When they were inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and also the Songwriters Hall of Fame, Bill Berry joined them to accept his award and to also perform with the group. They did 3 songs at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and 1 song at the Songwriters Hall of Fame. REM released 15 studio albums, 5 live albums, 6 EPs, and 16 compilation albums. Of those, all of the studio albums hit the top 40, with all but 6 of them hitting the top 10, with Out of Time and Monster hitting number 1, Accelerate, New Adventures, and Automatic for the People hitting number 2. They also released 63 singles. Of those, 20 hit the top 10, with 10 of those hitting number 1. The group won numerous awards, including Grammy Awards and MTV Video Music Awards. They were also known for being very outspoken on social and humanitarian issues, as well as in local politics in their old stomping grounds of Athens, Georgia. The absolutely incredible Hall of Fame career of REM, which all started with the release of their debut single, Radio Free Europe, on July 8th, 1981. This next story concerns 2 legends, 2 deaths, 1 date, 2 years apart, 2 different controversies. First up, Brian Jones was a key member of the Rolling Stones, and while Mick Jagger and Keith Richards wrote most of the music, Brian gave the Stones their signature sound. He experimented with the sitar and any other instrument he thought might set them apart from the other bands. Brian's problem was that he was also a partier of Olympic gold medal caliber. His addictions were so extreme that even Mick and Keith thought that he was out of control. Now, that's saying something considering Mick and Keith's reputations. Brian also had a reputation for being a misogynist and for being a whiny little brat, which really didn't help him with the rest of the band, at least the whiny brat part. Brian also supposedly started getting depressed that he was no longer the centerpiece of the band and that the group had kind of shifted to Mick and Keith. The problem was that while the band all partied like there was no tomorrow, at least it didn't affect their day jobs, until of course it started to. Brian started showing up to recording sessions either late or not at all, and if he did show up, he was usually way too wasted as far as recording sessions went. He was kind of useless as far as they go. The Stones had wanted to play the United States in the fall of 1969. However, due to a conviction that Brian had, he was denied a U.S. visa. A decision had to be made. And on June 8, 1969, the Rolling Stones fired Brian Jones. Jones went to his house to regroup and plan his next move, which mainly meant getting wasted. On July 3, 1969, Brian Jones was found dead at the bottom of his swimming pool. The official cause of death was listed as death by misadventure. What the coroner meant by the statement was that it was an accidental drowning brought on by various substances. That death by misadventure line alone, however, sent conspiracy nuts in overdrive, and ever since that day they blamed everybody from Mick and Keith to the British Secret Service for Brian's death because, I don't know. Whatever the reason, what can't be argued is that the world lost an amazing talent who unfortunately had way too many demons to conquer. The death of Brian Jones of the Rolling Stones on July 3rd, 1969, at the age of 27. Jim Morrison's death sent similar shockwaves throughout the conspiracy community. At the time of his death, his group The Doors were riding high. They had released a bunch of albums, all of them top commercial and critical successes. Jim, however, was beginning to court trouble. Sometimes literally. At a concert in Miami, Jim asked the audience if they wanted him to expose himself. That was enough to send the cops crazy. They arrested him and charged him with exposing himself, among many other charges. The truth was that he never actually did it, and the charges were pretty much made up. Regardless, he was found guilty. Jim decided that while he was out on bail, he would go to Paris to unwind and really escape. He and his girlfriend, Pamela Corson, apparently enjoyed Paris, going on long walks, writing poetry, etc., etc. They also got married in a Celtic ceremony, although there were original charges that it really was not legit, we'll say. However, on July 3rd, 1971, exactly 2 years to the day of Brian Jones's death, Jim's girlfriend found him dead in their bathtub. Here is where this story gets all sorts of weird. For starters, there was never any autopsy done. French law at the time didn't require it, so they never did it. At most, the coroner did a quick examination and said that the cause of death was a heart attack. For her part, his girlfriend changed her story so many times that to this day, no one really knows the truth. One day, she said that Jim never put anything in his system. The next day, she said that he did, but not that day. He took one substance, but not another, or the other way around. In any event, on April 25th, 1974, Pamela Corson herself passed away at the age of 27, so no one's really asking her any more questions about it. Some people think that Morrison actually faked his death, and that he is, of course, hanging out on that island with Biggie, Tupac, Hendrix, and Elvis. After all, he was the Lizard King. He could do anything. Much like Brian Jones, the hard truth is that on July 3rd, 1971, the world lost another talent far too soon when Jim Morrison of The Doors passed away at the age of 27. As always, let us attempt to end on a happy note with a birthday and a couple of honorable mentions. On July 8th, 1970, a boy was born in Los Angeles, California, to a family of visual artists. His mother was a member of the Andy Warhol factory. His dad was a composer. He grew up very poor. He first lived off of Hollywood Boulevard and then lived in another poor Hollywood neighborhood that had Asian and South American refugees. He spent time in Kansas where he picked up an appreciation for gospel music, and he even lived for a time in Europe before coming back to America. And all of this was before he had even hit the age of 10. When he came back to America, he lived back in Los Angeles. He started to become influenced by all sorts of music, everything from hip-hop to Latin music to punk rock. He applied to the High School for the Performing Arts, but was turned down. At this point, he learned how to play guitar and learned how to play blues and folk music. He hung out at the local college, got into jazz music, and took jobs loading trucks, among other small-time work. He would also become a street musician, playing blues and country music, and all of this was before he had hit the age of 19. One day he decided to go live in his mother's old stomping grounds of New York City. He spent almost a year being homeless, sleeping on people's couches, doing the occasional odd job. He also got into the art house music scene and made some friends. And within that year, he kind of grew sick and tired of New York and moved back to Los Angeles. He lived in a shed and worked in a video store. He went back to being a street musician again and also got into the art house scene out there. And during one of his shows, someone offered to help him record some demos. He started passing around the demos until one of them found its way to an independent record label. The record label offered to help him make a small album and hooked him up with hip-hop producer Carl Stevenson. Among the work that they did together was a hip-hop influenced song with a lot of slide guitar. After having to be convinced, he agreed to let the song be released, with him having absolutely no faith in the song itself because to him, the song sucked. The song became a huge hit, of course, and soon major record labels started bidding for his services. The rest is history. Over the past few decades, he has put out some of the most innovative, creative music out there. 2 of his albums made Rolling Stone magazine's greatest albums of all time list. He took all of the music that he was influenced by growing up and put his own spin on it. You never know what you're going to get from the guy next. The song that started his career, Loser, was one of the biggest songs of the 1990s. A big happy birthday to one of the most creative men in music and high school for the performing arts reject known as Beck, born July 8th, 1970. There are 2 honorable mentions to finish this podcast off this week. First up, on July 7th, 2007, the Live Earth charity concerts, which were 12 concerts on 7 continents to call attention to climate change, took place. We are not going to deep dive into them because we've got Live Aid coming up in next week's podcast, since that was held on July 13th, 1985. And we did a deep dive already into Live Aid's sequel, which was 2005's Live 8 concerts, in last week's podcast. I invite you to check that out at least, and to tune in next week. Live Earth was put on by the same people with the same issues as the other 2 and with some good music, so that's why they're getting a very quick mention. Next week, when we do Live Aid, it's going to be a deep, deep, deep dive into Live Aid. So, something to look forward to. In the meantime, the Live Earth concerts, the 3rd in the series, you might say, all were held on July 7th, 2007. Finally, on July 8th, 1947, people reported seeing a UFO in Roswell, New Mexico, near the Area 51 military base. The event, of course, has since spawned many, many conspiracy theories, along with some halfway decent movies. But it also inspired a lot of songs about aliens, including David Bowie's Starman, Megadeth's Hangar 18, and Debbie Harry's rap, of course, in Blondie's song Rapture, about the man from Mars eating cars, and some great movies, like I said, with some great soundtracks, like John Williams' film scores to E.T. and, of course, Close Encounters of the Third Kind. The Roswell, New Mexico UFO weather balloon, insert crazy conspiracy theory here, incident that inspired too many music and pop culture references to list here, including The X-Files, great show with some really great music, by the way. On July 8th, 1947, happy Roswell Day to you all who celebrate. And that is it for the Music History In-Depth podcast for July 3rd through the 9th. Thank you very, very much for listening and or watching if you're watching this on YouTube or Spotify. And next week, we deep dive into Live Aid and also Disco Demolition Night, which has its own sordid story.